So what happens when someone who thinks they're entitled to everything meets a guy who just won't budge? Well, Patricia Kincaid spent weeks trying to get Calvin Brewer to hand over his pool, but when he drained the whole thing, her anger turned the entire street into a show, and the ending left her completely embarrassed. Calvin Brewer had just gotten comfortable in his lounge chair on this warm Saturday afternoon in Fresno, California. The sky was that bright blue that makes you squint even with sunglasses, and you could smell sunscreen mixed with fresh-cut grass floating in the air. His pool was like glass, calm and perfect after he'd cleaned it that morning. This was his reward, his peaceful spot. He worked crazy hours as an IT manager, and these weekend pool sessions were the one thing he looked forward to all week. But then came the knock. It wasn't friendly or neighborly. It was sharp and demanding, the kind that tells you whoever's out there isn't here for small talk. Calvin frowned, slipped on his sandals, and walked to the back door that connected to the driveway. When he opened it, there she was, Patricia Kincaid. Mid-50s, hair pulled so tight into a bun it looked painful. Clipboard tucked under her arm like it was surgically attached. She wore a floral blouse and pressed beige pants. Basically the uniform of someone who treats every neighborhood issue like a business meeting. Patricia wasn't just any neighbor. She was the unofficial HOA boss, a role she'd given herself and took very seriously. "Calvin," she said flatly, like they'd been in the middle of a conversation. "We need to talk about your pool." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "My pool?" "Yes," she continued, stepping closer without being invited. "The neighborhood is planning a summer kickoff, a pool party. It'll be wonderful for everyone. Food, music, families together. And naturally we need to host it at your place. You've got the only pool big enough." Calvin let out a short laugh, thinking she had to be joking. But Patricia's face stayed dead serious, expectant. "You want me to host a party?" he asked carefully. Patricia shook her head quickly. "Not host, just provide the pool. The rest of us will handle food, decorations, drinks. All you have to do is let us in. It's for the community." Her wording bothered him. Let us in. His house, his pool, reduced to just a resource for her plans. "Patricia," he said slowly, "I don't think that's going to work. This is my family's pool. I've put a lot into maintaining it, and honestly, I don't feel comfortable having dozens of people I don't know using it." She blinked like she was shocked anyone would say no. Then her smile got tight. "Oh, come now, Calvin, don't be difficult. Everyone benefits when neighbors cooperate. It's only fair. And frankly, the HOA board thinks this would really set the right tone for summer." Calvin crossed his arms, standing firm. "The answer's no." Patricia's lips pressed thin. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by kids playing down the street. "You're being very unneighborly," she snapped, her polite act dropping. "This isn't just about you. It's about all of us." Calvin took a slow breath. He could feel the heat rising under his collar, not from the sun, but from irritation. He'd worked too hard to keep his space private, his sanctuary intact. And here was Patricia acting like his effort, his money, his property belonged to her vision of community. "Patricia," he said evenly, "I respect the neighborhood, but my answer isn't going to change." Her eyes narrowed. She clutched her clipboard tighter, knuckles whitening around it. "We'll see about that," she said before turning sharply and marching back down the driveway. Calvin watched her leave, shaking his head. The sound of his pool pump kicked on in the background, steady and reliable. For a moment, he tried to settle back into his chair, but his peace had been ruined. Something told him Patricia wasn't done, and that knock at the door was only the beginning of a much bigger storm. But if Calvin thought that was the end of it, he was about to find out Patricia had a lot more planned. By the time Sunday rolled around, Calvin had almost convinced himself Patricia's visit had been just a passing annoyance. Maybe she'd realized how unreasonable her request was, Maybe she'd move on to another project to keep her busy with her self-appointed HOA duties. But by late afternoon, his doorbell rang again. He opened the door to find Patricia standing there with that same clipboard under her arm. This time, she wasn't alone. A man Calvin recognized as her husband Leonard stood behind her. He was tall, gray-haired, wearing a polo shirt and khakis. He kept his eyes fixed somewhere over Calvin's shoulder, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Calvin," Patricia began, her voice sharper than before, "we need to revisit our conversation." Calvin let out a tired sigh. "Patricia, I was clear yesterday." She lifted her chin. "I don't think you fully understand what I'm saying. This event isn't optional. It's a community function organized by the HOA, and as such, it requires cooperation from all members. You have the only pool large enough. It has to be here." Calvin leaned against the doorframe. "With respect, no one is hosting a party at my house. Period." Patricia's smile returned, but it was brittle, strained. "Calvin, we're not asking you to go out of your way. Everything will be handled. Cleanup, setup, music, food. All we need is access. Think about what this means for neighborhood spirit. You don't want to be the one dragging everyone down, do you?" Behind her, Leonard shifted uncomfortably. He gave Calvin a glance that almost looked like an apology, but his silence made it clear he wasn't about to contradict his wife. Calvin's patience thinned. "Dragging everyone down? Patricia, I've got no problem with neighbors having a good time, but this is my home, my property. I bought this house, I maintain this pool, and I pay for the upkeep. You don't get to decide what happens here." Her eyes narrowed again. "You're being selfish." Calvin chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Selfish is demanding to use someone else's pool because you don't want to rent a venue." Her nostrils flared. "If you really want to be part of this neighborhood, you'll think carefully about how you respond. The board doesn't look kindly on homeowners who refuse to cooperate." There it was again, the HOA card. Patricia wielded it like a weapon. Calvin could feel his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "If you're threatening me with HOA nonsense, Patricia, save it. Nothing in those bylaws says you can force someone to hand over their property." She opened her mouth, but Calvin cut her off. "I said no, and that's final." For a second, Patricia looked stunned, like she couldn't comprehend being told no twice in a row. Then she turned slightly toward Leonard. "You see what I'm dealing with?" Leonard gave a non-committal shrug. "Maybe we should—" "No!" Patricia snapped. Her head whipped back toward Calvin. "This isn't over!" Her voice was firm, her tone icy. She stepped back, straightened her clipboard like it was armor, and walked down the dormitory, Iveway again with Leonard trailing behind. Calvin closed the door firmly, locking it. He leaned against it for a moment, shaking his head. He couldn't believe the audacity. He had neighbors who waved, who shared garden tips, who occasionally borrowed tools. That was community. But this was entitlement wrapped in HOA authority. Later that evening, his wife Yvonne noticed his silence. She found him sitting by the pool, staring at the water. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently, setting down a glass of iced tea beside him. "Patricia again," Calvin muttered. "She came back. Brought Leonard this time. Same story, more pressure." Yvonne frowned. "What does she want now?" "The same thing. The pool for her so-called community party." Yvonne sighed, shaking her head. "She's always pushing people around. Don't let her get to you." Calvin rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not just her. It's the way she acts like she has a right to our things. Like my work. My money doesn't mean anything if it doesn't fit her plans." Yvonne touched his arm. "You've got every right to say no. Don't doubt that." Calvin gave a small smile. "Thanks. I just have a feeling she won't let it go." And Yvonne was right. Patricia wasn't done. She was just getting started. And Calvin had no idea how far she'd go to push her demand. But the next time Patricia showed up, she wouldn't come alone. And this time, she planned to make him look like the bad guy. The following Saturday, Calvin was grilling burgers in the backyard. The smell of sizzling meat carried over the fence, and his teenage son Julian, 14, lanky with a mop of curls, was tossing a football in the grass with a friend. Yvonne had just set out paper plates on the patio table when Calvin spotted Patricia again. This time she wasn't alone. 3 other neighbors walked with her like a small parade, making their way up the sidewalk toward his front yard. Calvin sighed, set the spatula down, and walked around the side gate. By the time he reached the driveway, Patricia was already halfway up it, clipboard under her arm as usual. "Calvin," she called, her voice carrying like she was announcing a town meeting. "We need to resolve this." Behind her stood Brenda Malloy, a short woman with a booming laugh who usually kept to herself. Thomas Reed, a retired electrician who still wore his union cap everywhere, and Linda Suarez, who had moved in just last year. They looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure why they'd been dragged along, but didn't want to be the odd one out. "Resolve what?" Calvin asked, his tone calm but firm. Patricia took a step closer. "This nonsense with your pool. The neighborhood is expecting this event. People are counting on you." Calvin crossed his arms. "I told you before." "No." Brenda shifted, avoiding eye contact. Thomas cleared his throat. "Look, Cal," he started, his voice gravelly. "Patricia says the board voted. They want the party here. She said you'd agreed once she explained it better." Calvin blinked. "Explained it better?" "I said no, Thomas. More than once." Linda gave a small shrug. "I thought it was already decided. I even volunteered to bring drinks." Patricia pounced on that. "See? People are contributing. Everyone's excited. It's just one afternoon. Why are you being so stubborn?" Julian wandered over, football in hand, catching the edge of Patricia's voice. "Dad, what's going on?" Patricia's gaze flicked to the boy. "Your father's being unreasonable. Don't you want to have a party with your friends here? Imagine how fun it would be." Julian frowned. "It's not my decision. And honestly, I don't want a bunch of random people in our pool." Calvin placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Go help your mom set the table," he said quietly. Julian nodded and retreated, glaring at Patricia as he left. Patricia's smile thinned. "Even your family could enjoy this. You're making it harder than it needs to be." Calvin exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure. "Patricia, let me put it plainly. This pool is my responsibility. I'm the one who cleans it, balances the chemicals, pays the water bill, and fixes things when they break. It's not a public park. It's not a clubhouse. It's mine. And I am not giving you access for your party." The group fell quiet. Brenda shifted uncomfortably. Linda looked at Patricia with uncertainty. Even Thomas scratched his chin like the situation wasn't as clear-cut as Patricia had pitched it. Patricia broke the silence, her voice rising. "You're painting yourself into a corner, Calvin. People are starting to talk. They think you don't care about anyone but yourself. Do you really want that reputation?" Eyes narrowed. "If caring about my family and my property makes me selfish, so be it. I'd rather be called selfish than used." The words hung heavy in the air. Brenda gave a little cough, muttered something about needing to check her roast, and excused herself. Thomas gave Calvin a nod that felt almost respectful before following Brenda. Linda lingered for a moment, then murmured, "Maybe there's another way," before slipping off too. That left Patricia standing rigid, her cheeks flushed with frustration. "You think you've won," she said, her voice low but sharp. "But you don't know who you're dealing with." Calvin tilted his head. "Patricia, it's a pool, not a battlefield." Her lips curved into a thin smile. "For you, maybe. For me, it's about principle, and I always win on principle. She spun on her heel, heels clicking against the driveway, and stormed off. Calvin stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't just about water and chlorine anymore. Patricia had made this personal. But Calvin had no idea how personal she planned to make it, and the next move would push him to his breaking point. That evening, Calvin sat at the kitchen table, staring into the ice melting at the bottom of his glass. The glow from the overhead light felt harsh, almost interrogative, and he could still hear Patricia's words echoing in his head. I always win on principle. Yvonne walked in carrying a stack of folded laundry. She paused when she saw him. You've got that look again. Calvin glanced up. What look? The one where you're chewing on something you can't spit out, she said, setting the clothes on the counter. She slid into the chair across from him. Talk to me. Calvin rubbed his forehead. She came back today, and she didn't come alone. Yvonne frowned. Who? Patricia. She brought Brenda, Thomas, and Linda. Tried to make it look like the whole neighborhood was on board. Yvonne leaned back. Let me guess. She told them you'd already agreed? Something like that, Calvin muttered. Told them I was just being stubborn. Tried to use the crowd to pressure me. Yvonne crossed her arms, her expression hardening. That woman has too much time on her hands. Julian entered then, barefoot, still tossing the football in his hands. Dad, why is she so obsessed with the pool? Well, can't she just rent a community center or something? That's what I said, Calvin replied. But Patricia doesn't want to pay for anything. She wants easy access to what's not hers. Julian flopped into the chair beside him. I told her I don't want strangers here. It's not even about the pool anymore. It's about her wanting to boss you around. Yvonne smiled faintly at her son. Smart boy. Julian shrugged. I've seen it at school. Some kids act like the world owes them whatever they want. When you say no, they get mad and try to turn everyone against you. He tossed the football into the air and caught it. Same game, just different players. Calvin couldn't help but laugh softly. Pretty much. He looked at his son. But in this game, we don't back down. Julian grinned. Good. Because I don't want to clean up after her crazy pool party. Yvonne chuckled, then turned serious again. Cal, what's your plan? Because I don't think she's stopping here. Calvin swirled the ice in his glass. Honestly, I don't know yet. But I know one thing. I'm not giving in. If I cave now, she'll think she can come back every time she wants something. Yvonne reached over and squeezed his hand. Then we stand together. She may be loud, but we're not alone. Not everyone likes her tactics. Trust me, people see through it. Calvin exhaled slowly, her words settling into him like a steady anchor. The next day, he got a call from his older sister, Marcia, who lived across town in Clovis. Word had already spread. Cal, what's this I hear about some lady trying to take over your pool? She asked, her voice crackling with disbelief through the phone. Calvin sighed. It's Patricia. You know the type. Oh, I know the type, Marcia said. We had one in my neighborhood. Tried to tell people how high their grass should be cut, until one day she picked the wrong battle and the HOA board tossed her out. Calvin raised an eyebrow. Really? Really, Marcia said. Don't let her scare you with her titles and rules. People like that thrive on intimidation. Take away the audience, and they shrink. Calvin mulled that over long after the call ended. Maybe Marcia was right. But Patricia didn't strike him as the shrinking type. She thrived on control, and losing wasn't in her vocabulary. That night at dinner, the family sat around the table, the TV on low in the background. Julian stabbed at his mashed potatoes, then looked up. Dad, what if she actually calls the police? She seemed crazy enough. Yvonne shot him a look. Don't say crazy. But she is, Julian insisted. Who tries to steal someone's pool? Calvin set his fork down. If she calls the police, we'll handle it. We've got nothing to hide. I've been respectful. I've kept calm. They'll see that. Julian leaned back in his chair. Still, she gives me the creeps. Yvonne gave him a gentle smile. Don't worry about her. We've got this. Calvin looked at his wife and son, the two people who mattered most, and felt a wave of clarity. Patricia could posture all she wanted. She could drag neighbors into her schemes, make threats, wave bylaws in his face. But she didn't live here. She didn't pay for this pool. And she sure didn't decide how his family lived in their own home. But Patricia wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. Her next move would push everything to a level Calvin never saw coming. On Wednesday evening, Calvin pulled into the driveway after work, expecting the usual peace of coming home. Instead, he saw a small crowd gathering at the edge of his front yard. He slowed the car, recognizing several faces: Brenda Malloy, Thomas Reed, Linda Suarez, and a few others he hadn't spoken to much since moving into the neighborhood. And of course, there she was at the center, Patricia Kincaid, clipboard in hand, like a general surveying her troops. Calvin parked, got out, and locked the car deliberately, taking his time. He wasn't about to rush over like he was on trial. As he approached, Patricia cleared her throat loudly, commanding attention. "Ah, there he is," she announced, "the man of the hour." The group turned to look at him. Some seemed curious, others uneasy, and one or two carried the same smug expression Patricia wore. Calvin stopped a few feet away. "What's going on here?" Patricia's smile was sharp. "We're having a neighborhood discussion about your refusal to cooperate with the HOA, GSAS, and the community." Calvin let out a slow breath. "Patricia, you don't get to host meetings on my lawn. Move this off my property." She ignored that, flipping through her clipboard. "Neighbors, as you all know, the HOA is built on unity and cooperation. We all give something for the greater good. And yet Mr. Brewer here has made it clear he thinks he's above that. He refuses to let us use his pool for our summer event. He doesn't care about neighborhood spirit." Murmurs rippled through the group. Calvin raised his voice. "Let's clear something up. I never agreed to this. This pool belongs to my family and no one else. I work hard to maintain it. I pay the bills, and it's not a public park." Linda Suarez looked conflicted, shifting her weight. "I mean, I get that it's his pool. I just thought—" Patricia cut her off. "It's not just about the pool, Linda. It's about participation, about generosity. If we all acted the way he does, this neighborhood would fall apart." Calvin stepped closer, his tone firm. "Patricia, you've twisted this from the start. Saying no to you doesn't mean I don't care about the community. It means I value my boundaries. If you wanted a pool party, you should have planned it at a space designed for crowds, not someone's backyard." Thomas Reed scratched his beard. "She did make it sound like you'd already said yes," he admitted quietly. Patricia's head snapped toward him. "Thomas, really, don't confuse the issue." But Calvin caught it, that little crack in her facade. He turned back to the group. "Did she tell you I agreed? Because I didn't. Not once." Brenda frowned. "That's not how she put it." Patricia's face flushed red. "You're twisting my words, Calvin." "No," Calvin replied evenly. "You're twisting mine." For a moment, the group fell silent, and it was Patricia's turn to squirm. She recovered quickly, though, straightening her shoulders. "Regardless of what you say, this isn't finished. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, there are ways to make you." Yvonne had come outside by now, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Patricia. "Enough," she said firmly. "This is harassment. You don't show up at someone's house with a mob and try to shame them into handing over their property. You should be ashamed of yourself." The neighbors looked between the two women. A couple nodded subtly, clearly siding with Yvonne. Patricia's jaw tightened. "We'll see what the board has to say." Calvin stepped up beside his wife. "Go ahead. Call the board. File whatever complaints you want. But you won't get my pool. The group began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others whispering. Patricia lingered a moment longer, glaring at Calvin, before finally stalking off. Back inside, Yvonne closed the blinds with more force than necessary. She's not going to stop, Cal. Calvin rubbed his temples. I know. Julian, who had been watching from the window upstairs, came down. Dad, this is getting ridiculous. She looked like she was about to explode out there. Calvin nodded slowly. That's because she's losing control, and people like her, they don't handle that well. Yvonne placed a hand on his shoulder. So what's next? Calvin looked out at the shimmering pool water in the backyard, then back at his family, his jaw set. Next, I make sure she understands once and for all, this pool isn't hers to take. But the way Calvin chose to send that message would shock everyone, and Patricia's fury would only burn hotter. By Friday afternoon, Calvin had reached his breaking point. The week at work had been long enough, and coming home to more whispered looks from neighbors only added to the weight on his shoulders. Every time he pulled into the driveway, he could feel eyes on him. Not all hostile, but curious, watchful, like the whole street had been drafted into Patricia's campaign. That evening, he sat on the edge of a deck chair with a wrench in one hand, staring at the turquoise water of his pool. The sun was setting behind the fence, painting the sky with streaks of gold and orange, and the surface of the water caught it all in a shimmer. For most people, it would be a relaxing sight. For Calvin, it was now a reminder of every knock, every clipboard, every manipulative speech Patricia had given in his driveway. Julian plopped down beside him. You look like you're about to do something crazy, the boy said with a half grin. Calvin gave him a sideways glance. Crazy or necessary? Depends how you look at it. Julian leaned back, arms behind his head. She's not going to stop, is she? No, Calvin admitted. She's the type who keeps pushing until someone makes her stop. And if I just keep saying no, she'll twist it, make it look like I'm the problem. Julian sat up. So what are you going to do? Calvin took a deep breath. I'm going to drain it. The words hung in the air. Julian blinked. Drain it? Like all of it? Every drop, Calvin said firmly. If she wants to fight over the pool, I'll take it off the table. No water, no party, no argument left. Julian stared at the rippling surface, then back at his father. That's actually kind of genius. It's also going to cost me time and money to refill it later, Calvin admitted. But at least it'll buy peace. Later that night, he called Yvonne out to the patio to explain. She listened quietly, her arms folded as she gazed at the pool. You're really going to drain it? Yes. She let out a slow sigh. That'll send a message, all right. She studied him for a moment. You sure you're ready for the fallout? Calvin nodded. She wants to turn this into a power play? Well, two can play that game. If she thinks she can dictate what happens here, she's in for a surprise. Yvonne considered it for a moment, then finally gave a small smile. Do it. Show her she doesn't run this house. The next morning, Calvin was up before dawn. He attached the drainage hose, connected the pump, and let the system do its work. The quiet hum of the pump filled the backyard as water gushed down the side yard into the storm drain. By 9 o'clock, the water level had dropped noticeably. By noon, the shallow end was almost dry, the white plaster gleaming under the hot California sun. Julian filmed part of it on his phone, shaking his head. She's gonna lose it when she sees this. And lose it she did. Around 2 in the afternoon, as Calvin coiled up the drainage hose, he heard Patricia's voice from across the fence. What on earth are you doing? He turned, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. Draining it. She stormed up to the gate and threw it open without knocking. Are you insane? Do you know how much water that is? You can't just... Yes, I can, Calvin cut in. "It's my pool, my what? Air bill, my property. You wanted to make it a battleground, so I removed the target." Her face went crimson. "You're wasting resources. Do you know what kind of example this sets for the neighborhood? People are going to think." "They'll think I stood up for myself," Calvin interrupted again. "They'll think I didn't let someone bully me into giving away what doesn't belong to them. If they don't like it, too bad." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for words. Finally, she jabbed a finger toward the emptying pool. "You're going to regret this, Brewer. Mark my words." Calvin simply turned back to winding the hose. "I'll take my chances." She huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed back down the sidewalk. By evening, the pool was nothing but a hollow shell, cracked leaves scattered along the bottom. It looked strange, almost eerie, stripped of the water that had made it a family haven. Yet Calvin felt lighter. The space was his again. The symbol of control Patricia had tried to hijack was gone, and she couldn't argue with an empty pool. But Calvin underestimated just how far Patricia was willing to go, and draining the pool only pushed her to escalate in ways that would drag the police into the picture. By Sunday afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed in front of the Brewer house, whispering to one another as they glanced toward the now empty pool. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smirked like they admired the boldness of it. But not Patricia. Patricia was livid. Around 3 o'clock, Calvin heard sharp knocks at his door. Not the usual 3 taps. This was a pounding rhythm that demanded attention. He opened it to find Patricia standing there, her face flushed, clipboard clutched so tightly that the corner bent against her chest. Behind her were 2 more neighbors, Brenda Malloy and Linda Suarez. "Do you think this is funny?" Patricia snapped, jabbing a finger toward the backyard. Calvin leaned against the doorframe, calm but firm. "Funny? No. Necessary? Yes." "You drained the pool just to spite me." "I drained the pool," Calvin erected, "because you refused to hear the word no. You wanted to turn my home into a community center. That wasn't going to happen." Brenda shifted awkwardly. "Patricia, maybe we should just let this go." Patricia shot her a glare that silenced her immediately. "Let it go? He just wasted thousands of gallons of water because he couldn't be bothered to share. What kind of neighbor does that?" Calvin's voice dropped low. "The kind of neighbor who doesn't get bullied." Linda raised her hand slightly, trying to ease the tension. "Look, maybe there's a compromise. Calvin, what if you hosted just a small gathering?" "There is no compromise!" Patricia snapped, cutting her off. "He's made this personal. He's humiliated me, and the entire community is watching." Calvin sighed. "Patricia, you're humiliating yourself. You showed up at my house multiple times, dragged people into your little campaign, tried to make me out to be selfish. And when that didn't work, you turned it into a battle of wills. This isn't about community. This is about you needing control." Patricia's face turned even redder. "I am the one holding this neighborhood together," she shouted. "Without me, this place would fall apart." "Then maybe," Calvin said evenly, "it deserves to." Her jaw clenched so tightly that Calvin thought she might crack a tooth. She spun around, muttering under her breath, and marched back toward the sidewalk. Brenda and Linda lingered for a second, giving Calvin apologetic looks before hurrying after her. Later that evening, Calvin sat outside with Yvonne and Julian. The pool, now bone dry, looked strange under the porch lights. Yvonne sipped her tea, shaking her head. "She's not going to stop, Cal. You saw her face. She looked ready to combust." Julian kicked at a pebble by the patio. "She's obsessed. It's not even about the party anymore. It's about winning." Calvin leaned back, staring up at the darkening sky. "Then let her think she's in some kind of competition. I know what's mine, and I know what's right. She can't take that away." But Patricia wasn't done. The next morning, a bright orange envelope appeared in Calvin's mailbox. Inside was a formal HOA notice, citing him for uncooperative behavior and a vague claim of failure to comply with community participation standards. Calvin almost laughed at the absurdity of it. There was no such clause in the bylaws. He knew because he'd read them front to back the moment he moved in. Still, the notice was proof Patricia had escalated. That evening, Yvonne found him at the kitchen table with the envelope open beside his dinner plate. "She's really going through with this." "Looks like it," Calvin said. "She's trying to make it official. Problem is, it won't hold up. There's no rule about sharing your private property for neighborhood events." Julian leaned over his father's shoulder, reading the paper. "This looks like something she typed up herself." "Wouldn't surprise me," Calvin muttered. And then, as if on cue, there was another knock at the door. Calvin answered it to find Patricia again, this time with Leonard standing stiffly beside her. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You've brought this on yourself," she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of the community. You defied the board, and you wasted water just to prove a point. You think you're clever, but you've crossed the line." Calvin folded his arms. "What line? The one where I refuse to let you treat me like your property manager? Yeah, I crossed that one proudly." Her eyes flashed. "If you won't cooperate, I'll take this to the authorities. Let's see how smug you are when you're explaining your behavior to the police." Leonard shifted uncomfortably, but Patricia didn't break eye contact. Calvin smirked faintly. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll gladly explain. I've got nothing to hide." Patricia's lips curled in a tight smile. "You will regret this." She turned on her heel and stalked away, Leonard trailing silently behind. Calvin closed the door, feeling a strange calm wash over him. Patricia was out of control, and if she really called the police, at least the truth would finally be exposed. But when those flashing lights showed up at his curb, Calvin realized this fight had officially left the neighborhood and entered a whole new arena. It happened on a humid Thursday evening, just after dinner. Calvin was rinsing dishes in the sink while Yvonne packed up leftovers when the sound of tires crunching against the curb made him glance out the window. 2 squad cars pulled up in front of the house, their red and blue lights spinning silently. Julian, who had been in the living room with his headphones on, pulled one side off and looked toward the window. Dad? Why are there cops outside?" Calvin dried his hands with a dish towel and exchanged a look with Yvonne. He didn't even need to guess who had called. He muttered, "Here we go." The knock on the door was firm but not hostile. Calvin opened it to see 2 officers standing on the porch. One was a tall, broad man in his early 40s with a trimmy,